Is money a curse word? One of the things that I've found is that the word money can either be a curse word, a negative word, or a very positive word in your life, depending upon the way you grew up and the habits that you have with your finances. We are going to be having an episode talking about how to maximize your dollars and help turn the word money from a curse word to a positive word, not just for you, but for generations to come. Come join us. Welcome to the All Things Financial Podcast, where we talk about all things money. Our goal is to help people win with their money so that they can win in life. And I'm really excited because today our topic is money a curse word? And one of the things that we've noticed is the word money for a lot of people is actually a negative word. When you bring it up, it's almost like they're intimidated by it. Maybe you grew up in a house where money was always tight. Maybe money was a negative thing. And one of the things that we want to talk about is how do you live life in a way where money's a positive word, where when you think about money, that you actually have a positive response because it's always been something that maybe for the first time that you're a good steward of. There's plenty of it. And so today we're going to talk about some of the things that impact people around that word. And so is money a curse word? What do you think, Yelisey?
Yeah, I think it's a complicated topic because it represents so many things. Like I think it'd be hard pressed to find an area in life where money doesn't affect that. And you can totally imagine where somebody has an experience where they put all their time and effort into getting that paycheck, going to work, and they still don't have enough to provide for their family. Like in that scenario, you can see how that might not be a positive interaction with money that somebody has. And then you can see the other side of it too, the extreme sides of materialism and greed and pursuing money to the exclusion of maybe some other things too. So you can see how it's a mixed bag. There's a lot to talk about here, but I think there's definitely some good key positive takeaways.
When I was in high school, my younger sister, basically she had to buy tabs for her car and pay a cell phone bill. And I'll never forget, she was like, I don't like talking about money. And I kind of paused for a second because I thought, why doesn't she like talking about money? And I think, when you're young or you're getting started, I know when I came out of college, I thought my goal was like to become successful and maybe even rich. And I found out that at first you work really hard just to be broke. And one of the things that my dad always says is a lot of people spend their whole life living 30, 60, 90 days behind. What if they just paused, were disciplined, and they took a few steps, they could live their whole life a little bit ahead. Yeah. And so what we want to talk about is how do you change the word money and how do you make it positive, not just for you and your spouse, but even for your kids. I'm excited to help people take that word from a negative word, maybe like a curse word, and what do you do to make it a positive word? And so we're going to talk about that today. Where do you want to start?
We went to ORU together, and ORU really emphasized something like, what do they call it? The whole person experience, right? Spirit, body, mind. And we had, I don't know if you had the same professor that I did in a health and fitness class, Alec Musakuma. You never had him?
No.
He was a guy from Nigeria, and he always had this quote where he said, intake versus expenditure. And that's literally the secret to weight loss. But I feel like this conversation has a lot of similarities to the weight loss conversation, where it's like you can recommend that somebody does diet, exercise, and it's like that's the last thing anybody wants to hear, even if it's true, right? And the same thing with money. It's like this taboo conversation where somebody says, hey, develop your skills, make yourself more valuable, put yourself on a budget, get rid of the credit card debt, all the things that we talk about. But for whatever reason, it's kind of like that weight loss conversation where you're fat shaming, right?
Almost every month I'll have friends, especially when I was right out of college, but I'll have people that'll message me and they'll say, hey, we're trying to figure out our finances. We're trying to look for a path.
Right.
Is there a way that isn't Dave Ramsey? And I kind of laugh because at the
I actually
end of
love
the day,
hearing that, but
and I understand some of that, but what I want to say is, man, what Dave Ramsey's teaching you is the basics.
Right.
And it's like everybody wants a plan and they know who Dave Ramsey is. They know about Financial Peace University, but they're like, is there another way? And what I want to say is, no, until you're stable, until you've paid off your bad debt, there isn't another way. Do that first, and then let's talk about leveraging with good debt versus bad debt.
Right.
I think what's funny is even though people know about it, everybody wants maybe an easier way or a different way.
And I think the reason for that is, when you offer somebody advice like that, just really sound advice, whether it's Dave Ramsey or somebody else, because you're not taking the time to go through and say, hey, of course, there's things that have happened to you, right? Mm-hmm. People have inflicted things upon you, right? There's decisions that you haven't made for yourself. There's opportunities that you weren't exposed to that maybe somebody else was. And it's like, we know all that. in light of all that, the advice that you're giving still holds true.
Yeah.
And I think that because you're not taking the time to do those things, sometimes people think it's cruel or you're being insensitive with the advice that you give. And I would say it's good advice even because of those things. It works even for people that have had setbacks and things like that have happened to them.
70% of people that are getting married don't talk about money before the marriage. And what's interesting is, on average, a couple in the United States is married for 7 years. And the number one reason they divorce, which is a little over 50% of people, is because of communication around finances or the stress of finances.
Yeah.
And so one of the things I've found is that if we can help you get your money right, everything else in life is easier. And I'll never forget when Steph and I got married, and then we went to go add me to her bank accounts and her to mine. It was one of those things that I don't know why, but it felt like
that loss of control.
It felt loss of control. Felt like I was opening up the curtains to my whole life for somebody for the first time.
Yeah.
Even though I was excited to do life together, I was like, what is she going to think of the way I spend this, the way I invest that?
Yeah.
And I don't know why, but it almost felt like I was letting a stranger into my world who happened to be my best friend and wife.
Yeah. And I think we're going to talk about that a little bit later, how your wealth, your money, that what you've acquired in life, accumulated, it really represents your decisions. It's a reflection of who you are in many ways, sometimes fair or unfair. But people make that decision, that value judgment on who you are as a person. And I think that's why people avoid these conversations.
Yeah.
We're in the industry. We talk about money with everybody, right? We can't do what we do
for
unless
us it's normal.
That's normal. And it's actually, and it's not normal in most circles, but for what we do. But what would you say has been maybe one of the more awkward or unusual conversations or things that you just notice that happen regularly, even though like people come in here, they should have the expectation that we're going to ask questions about their budget, about their finances. And we've had some very unusual responses, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, I mean, I think sometimes we have people come in and we specialize with those in and nearing retirement. Typically, if somebody comes to meet us, whether it's through another family that we serve, whether it's through one of the 50 to 60 financial classes that we teach a year on Social Security, Medicare, taxes, insurance, estate planning, however we meet people, typically, we start with an educational process of a discovery where we hear what their goals are, projected retirement dates, expenses, assets. We move into the analysis before we go in and make recommendations. But as we put together, kind of a retirement projection, we need information, right? So typically we need expenses, assets, retirement dates, et cetera. Every so often, pretty often, somebody will say, well, I'm not sure I'm comfortable giving that information. And it's kind of like telling the doctor you feel sick, but you don't want to go through a physical.
Or going to the doctor, hoping for the correct diagnosis.
Tell me what's wrong.
But you don't give them all the symptoms.
Exactly.
So,
but I do think when it comes to our finances, it's personal, especially for us. We're meeting with people right before retirement, whatever that number is, whether they've saved a couple $100,000, $500,000, $1 million, or a couple $1 million or 10 million, it hits them that this is what we've spent 40 years of our life building. And they're coming up to this is all they'll ever have outside of the growth of those funds.
Right.
So I think it's very personal. The other thing that we hear a lot is people will say, hey, I'm sharing things that I've never shared with my kids. I'm sharing things that maybe one spouse goes to the restroom and they'll say, I've never shared this with my spouse.
Right.
And there are reasons, like we've met with couples where one is a great saver and the other actually has a gambling problem.
Where they're not just withholding from their kids. Sometimes they're withholding from each other, which is really awkward.
It is. And sometimes, you can understand why, whether it's right or not, is because they're concerned that spouse will go through those assets. And so I think one of the reasons why money is a negative word is because for most people where it comes across like a curse word is there was never enough. And I think one of the things that is different from Dave Ramsey. I think budgeting is important. I think bad debt, staying away from it is important. But I think one of the things that isn't talked about enough is not just lowering your expenses, but it's increasing your income. In fact, I'll never forget our first business coach that you and I had, Todd Ricker. Todd, if you're listening, we learned a lot of great things from him. But one of them is he said he'll have a family come in, it might be a family of 4, and they'll say, hey, we just can't find enough money in the budget for our kids to play sports. And she might be a stay-at-home mom, and he might make $75,000 a year. And he'll say, hey, if you live in the Twin Cities of Minnesota, I know based on $75,000 a year, today it's probably $100,000, you don't have enough money for your kids to play sports. You don't have an expense problem. You have an income problem.
Yeah.
So I think one of the things that can help with people's finances is like I've got a friend, we'll just call him John for the example. We were flying to Dallas, Texas, and he goes, hey, I want to go to that event with you, but I want to go because I want to run some ideas by you. He goes, we're really struggling. And long story short, they have 6 kids. He made like 120 grand a year. And he goes, no matter what we do, it just feels like there's never enough.
Yeah.
And I said, well, to be honest, I said, you don't have an expense problem. I overlooked, in conversation where they spend money, how it's going out.
Yeah.
What they had was an income problem. And so I think one of the things that we can help people with is figure out, how do you make the adjustments in your life so that you spend your whole life thinking money's a positive word, not a negative word.
And I think that that's maybe one of the more unusual things that you do well, right? A lot of times when people come in and they're already anticipating, the financial advisor is going to tell me that I have to cut back.
Yeah.
Or they're going to tell me they can't help me. And the other side of that coin is, no. The help isn't by shaving these things off, by removing these things. It's actually by increasing your income. Yeah. In the car world, we talk about there's no replacement for displacement, right? A lot of companies, they'll put on bigger brakes. They'll take things off of the vehicle to reduce the weight. But at the end of the day, horsepower in many cases ends up winning, right? You want more displacement. Yeah. And income is that for us. In some cases, that really is the answer. And I think that that's the difficult one to solve, because now you're telling somebody to go out there to develop new skills, make themselves more marketable, make themselves more appealing. And, that's a difficult thing to do. Maybe when you're in your 20s and you're still trying to figure things out, that makes a lot of sense. But imagine telling a 45-year-old with 4 kids at home and a stay-at-home mom that person needs to find a way to make themselves more marketable.
You can spend all the time in the world cutting expenses, and you should. We all should, right? We all have areas to cut.
Yeah.
I know, a lot of the families we meet with, they have adult kids that are still on their cell phone plan, and they're spending an extra $300-400 a month on that, on groceries. We don't only work with wealthy families, but we work with a lot of everyday people. And what is surprising is that for a lot of those people that have done a great job saving, they are only $500 to $700 a month away from either being comfortable or running out of money before they run out of life. Point number 1 today is cultural conditioning, right? It's rude to talk about money. A lot of times people don't like owing money, because how often, Yelisey, do you and I have people borrow money that don't pay it back?
I mean, that's a very common occurrence, right? I mean, I've experienced it, but I'm saying, just like we talk to so many clients, we meet new people every single day.
Yeah.
I mean, that comes up in conversation all the time.
Right. And I think too, one of the things I've decided, and I know we've had this conversation, is that when we borrow someone money, we kind of just assume that we're giving it.
Yeah, you have to. I mean, that's what we tell people. We tell people that, hey, because people ask, just last week, somebody was helping their son with a down payment, and they were giving a significant chunk of money. Yeah. They were giving it from their IRA, which means they're introducing taxable income for themselves. Right. They're going to take a tax hit, and they're giving away a significant chunk. Is that person ever going to pay his parents back? The answer is
unlikely. Right. Yeah. So that's, number 1 is cultural conditioning, right? So how do you get over money being a negative word? Number 2, so you and I...
Before we go to the religious one, on the cultural piece, I think this is important to touch on, because a lot of times people talk about wealth inequality as a big part of that. And one thing that I've always found fascinating, of course, people have setbacks. There's certain barriers that someone else has to face that maybe I didn't have to, and that's true, in any way you want to cut that, right? But think about the fact that if cultural or if inequality was that much of an issue, why is it that generational wealth doesn't continue to compound? Why isn't it that your wealth just doesn't continue to grow from generation to generation? Mm-hmm. In fact, most of the time what people say is, how many generations is it going to take to squander this? Right? It usually goes in the other direction. Yeah. So even though we all have limitations, we all have things that are placed on us, from an inequality standpoint, I think that, some of those barriers, I think a lot of it comes down to how you view money, being taught and coached on how to think about it in relationship to yourself, and whether you think about it as a tool or if it's something that you're constantly, in this scarcity mode where you just have to have enough to pay your bills. There's a lot of things that we're going to talk about a little bit later, but anyways, I thought that was worth mentioning.
One of the decisions that you have to make, I just recently read this book by John Maxwell. If you're an avid reader or you're a new reader, one of the things I recommend is picking up anything by John Maxwell. He's kind of the Christian guru on leadership. In one of his books, he talks about the difference between an abundance and a scarcity mindset. Yeah. And I think one of the things that I would just encourage people when it comes to money, if you're trying to break that as a curse word in your life, is choose to be somebody that has an abundance mindset and not a scarcity mindset. And even though you might have the knowledge to choose that, it's actually difficult to do. We were talking about even like booking hotel rooms, so like I grew up And we stayed at in hotel rooms that were $80 to $110 or $120 a night. And it was a nice hotel room. But as I've grown and wanted to stay in nicer places, I was talking about how, it's been difficult sometimes, even though your income goes up, for your mind to shift that, hey, now we can do these things. And so one of the things that I would just encourage people to decide is, as you grow your income, as you start building assets, to pre-decide to live with an abundance mindset instead of a scarcity mindset.
And it doesn't mean being reckless.
No. I mean, it's still being a great steward, but we've run into people that, they've got retirement assets of north of $5 million, and they are duct taping and super gluing their vehicle.
That's how they got $5 million.
Yeah. But also, I think it's a little sad because a lot of them, they have no legacy plans. They're not enjoying their life. So I would just say choose abundance instead of scarcity. Let's move into religion confusion. I think you'll crush that, and then I'll make some notes on it.
Well, you and I, we grew up in non-denominational churches, right?
Yeah.
And there's a lot of talk about money. And I think that for all of the good conversations and the good teaching that we've had, there's probably a lot of damage that's been done by bad teaching, right? Yeah. I don't know what the percentages are. I happen to think that I had the benefit of a lot of the good teaching, right? For us, it was always this mindset of making sure that you're a good steward of the talent, of the skill that God has given you, so that you could provide for your family and take it a step further, provide for the church, right? Provide for people who need the money more than you do, who don't have the same opportunities to the resources that you might have. Yeah. And that was really ingrained by my parents, by my church, by all the people, at least in my circles. And I know that that's not everybody's experience, so I want to be sensitive to the folks who maybe had the bad side of that, because there is a lot of excess that leads to the worst sides of materialism and the pursuit of wealth for the sake of wealth and just material possession. So I don't want to spend a whole time on the religious side, but that's my 2 cents.
Yeah, well, we've all heard money is the root of evil.
Yeah.
And I think the piece that people miss is that the love of money is the root of evil, right? Yeah. And so I think one of the ways that you fight that as you make more money, as you save more money, is that you practice reminding yourself that the money that we make isn't ours. We're just stewards of it.
Yeah.
And I think the way that we practice that is that you continue to walk out in generosity.
Right.
Again, we're in the Christian world. What's interesting about that is if you grew up in the church and you read your Bible, tithing is giving 10%, right?
Yeah.
And so what I've found, even reading secular books, is even in the world, those who are not faith-based, there's something inside them that says you should give away at least 10%. Now, we probably both know where that came from. When your life is blessed between the gifts and the talents you have and the discipline that you put into things, one of the ways to exercise not falling in love with money is by being generous. And so one of the things that my wife and I have always done is, as we've increased, we've been intentional to give more away, not just more money, but a bigger percentage. And for me, that's one of the ways that I make sure that I care more about people and things than I do about falling in love with money. What does that look like for you? As far as, you're also a generous person. You've lived that way. You've stayed that way. Has it been more difficult as your income has gone up since college? Or is it just as easy as it was when you lived on very little?
I wouldn't say it's gotten more difficult. I think that it's just like you said, generosity is maybe the most important way, the biggest way that you can keep yourself grounded. And just because you're generous doesn't mean that you can't fall into, some of the traps and that everybody experiences, because we all want things. We can all play the game where we're comparing ourselves to our neighbor and our friends, and we have an unhealthy obsession with accumulating more things and also being generous on the side. But I found that, for me, it's being generous with my finances, being generous with my time, and prioritizing things outside of myself, whether it's, community service or outreach or making sure that I'm taking care of my parents, right? That's a big one in my family. We culturally, we came from Ukraine, and we have a very tight-knit family. So for us, the finances aren't just in this industry. One of the things that you run into a lot is people who don't have enough resources to help with long-term care. We see even large estates that are decimated by that, families that are torn up over just, some of the health emergencies that happen later on in life. And for me, a priority has been to make sure that I can take care of my parents in that regard, but also myself. Sometimes the immediate concerns and things that family members have, that doesn't take a priority over making sure that my family's taken care of too. So generosity is definitely a priority, but also in perspective of, making sure that I have my priorities in order.
And I actually, like I said, you need to have your priorities in order, because probably a couple of years ago, I had a friend of mine And he just said, man, I'm a really generous person, but my wife isn't. And so he said, it's really difficult for me to be generous because she doesn't agree that we should live that way. And I said, well, let me ask you something. I said, how good of a job have you done making your wife feel secure financially?
Yeah.
And he was kind of like, what are you talking about? And I said, well, does she feel like you're just making it, or do you have an emergency savings so that she feels confident that you have enough so you can be generous?
Yeah.
And he goes, to be honest, we've never had an emergency fund before. And I said, well, one of the reasons why she isn't generous is you've never given her the confidence that you can be. He didn't really like that answer.
Right.
But he was listening. And so here's what I would say is, if you're someone who's generous, maybe you're the wife, and you guys have never had enough, have a conversation around money. I think the way that you turn the word money from a curse word to a positive word is that you don't only walk out undisciplined, but you become a great steward and you communicate well about where your finances are at. And one of the things I appreciate, my dad as a pastor, is he would tell people in the church, like, hey, don't give to missions and then not pay for your kids' sports, because now your kids are seeing that money is a negative thing because you care more about, somebody else's kids than your own. And so one of the things I would just say, as I kind of pass it back to you, is one of the ways to make money a positive word is to have an emergency savings account. So if you're a generous person, but you got to cut back on generosity for 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 months so that your wife and your kids feel secure, you should do that.
Yeah, and I think one way that sometimes we talk about it is protecting the mothership, right?
100%.
We want to make sure that, whatever that means, that security blanket, your family always has to come first, right? Your family relies on you for these things. And not just, you and I mean, there's plenty of women who are the providers in their family as well.
The higher income earners.
But, right, we've run into that all the time, just 2 days ago, and a significant difference between the husband and wife, and that's okay too.
I pray every day my wife earns more money than
I do too. I mean, but one thing that is different in preferences, so I often say, hey, I grew up poor, right? And I grew up in an immigrant family, but I can point to my sister who had the same upbringing and has a totally different view on, and I won't say which sister, but
she knows,
right? Those who know me know, or my family. I grew up with my family all the time. Our conversations were on the topic of, hey, no, we can't buy that. We can't get that right now. No, that's too expensive. Even as my income has grown, I find myself saying those same things, even though I can easily afford some of these items.
Yeah.
And one thing I found is for me, the ability to buy something, having that ability to buy something is almost better than having bought the thing, because we always couldn't buy it, so so I don't necessarily have to have it. I've gone without as a kid, and I feel like sometimes that's gone into my adult life, but that doesn't mean that my wife, my spouse, or whoever, my kids, doesn't mean that they share that same view.
Yeah.
So sometimes there's a huge disconnect that can obviously, lead to some things.
Well, and I would say that comes down to communication, right? I would agree with you that there are things that I purchased that after I purchased it, it was it was more the option that was more exciting.
Yeah.
Now, 95% of those purchases I would make again because I am somebody that likes things that impact my family, that give me freedom, that, like buying 4-wheelers for my kids. I would spend that over and over again because instead of watching TV inside when it's warm outside, we're creating memories outside. They come inside tired, right? So there are things like that. But one of the things I would say is increase your communication around money. And so one of the things that Steph and I do, at least quarterly, right? So at least every 3 months, we sit down and we talk about what is our goal the next 3 months. Do we have a vacation coming up? Are we doing a home remodel? Is there a project at church that we want to give to? And then we talk about where money has gone, where we want it to go, and where we're sitting. And I think one of the things that has helped money be a positive word in our household is that instead of having silence around money, we communicate around the finances.
To wrap things up, I think one of the biggest things, we talked about this in the beginning, that sometimes the difference between someone who has a positive experience with money versus someone who has a negative experience, which can lead to all of these unhealthy ways of dealing and talking about money.
Yeah.
If you were to say, how do you shift somebody, or how do you get somebody to move from one camp to the other? And I think both of us agree that a lot of it has to do with mindset, how you think and how you talk about money. But what would be one key takeaway that you could say, hey, this could lead to a healthier understanding of money, a healthier relationship with money, and just a better way to talk and think about it? How would you relay that?
I would say there's two things. One is, if money's always been a negative word and it's always felt like there isn't enough, make a commitment to go 6 months without making a big purchase and just start putting money away so that you have an emergency fund, right? And I know it's really basic, but you and I both know people that make $250,000 a year, $300,000 a year, some that make $500,000 a year. And if their job or their business got shut down, they wouldn't make it 3 months, 6 months, 9 months. And I think between savings and investments, you should be able to go 3 months and be okay, 6 months and be okay, a year and be okay. So I would say spend the next 6 months putting together an emergency fund. The second thing I would do, because I think there's always 2 steps to everything, as you know, I would say, how do we not only lower our expenses, but how do we increase our income? You know, not to get into politics, but you look right now, one of the things that Elon Musk was supposed to do, and he did a good job of, is lower the expenses while President Trump is trying to increase our income. Well, any one of those by themselves, lower expenses, same income, higher income, same expenses, a positive. But if you can combine lowering your expenses and increasing your income, now you have a surplus. And then my last tip would be for those that I lead and coach, I always tell them that as soon as you get a raise, make a commitment for 120 days, at least 4 months, that you're not going to increase your expenses. Because one of the things that we all tend to do, and I know I've been guilty of it, is when my income went up, I bought a nicer house, I bought a nicer car. And even though I was waiting for more money, now all of a sudden I ate the increase and I have no more peace of mind, no more savings. And so what I encourage people is spend 6 months lowering your expenses, look at ways to increase your income. And if you can do that for 6 months, you'll spend the rest of your life living ahead instead of behind. What would you say?
I definitely agree with everything you're saying. I think that we have a tendency to judge others, and we fear being judged on the amount of wealth that we have, on the vehicle that we drive, the house that we live in. Instead, we try to pretend like this whole pursuit of money, it's the superficial endeavor, and that's why we don't talk about it. So I would say my biggest advice would be changing how we think and how we speak about money. Just kind of admitting and saying, hey, I don't have more money right now because of the choices I've made. Right, just putting all the responsibility on me. And I'm not being cruel. I'm not being insensitive.
It's just the truth.
I'm not downplaying the fact that you've had terrible things happen to you, that opportunities didn't come your way. What I'm admitting is, hey, I've said yes to certain opportunities. I have more money because of that. I've said no to opportunities that could have led to more money, right? Yeah. But I made that decision. Yep. There's certain opportunities I simply didn't have, and I didn't have the option to say yes or no to that. Maybe you've had those opportunities. Right. But ultimately, it's a reflection of the choices that I've made. Yeah. And just making sure that that's something that I can internalize. I can say that out loud. I've made these choices. This is what it's led to. And I'm not looking at it as something negative. Some of these choices I absolutely should have said no to. And they maybe would have led to more money, right? I also said yes to more family time, right? That maybe has led to less money, right?
Yeah.
But those are choices that are essential to make. So I'm not making a value judgment here. I'm just saying the money I have is a reflection of the choices that I've made. Yeah. So making that realization and then looking at it as an exchange of our talent, of our time in exchange for something else. Yeah. Improve your talents. Spend your time better, and you can exchange it for something a little more lucrative, more money. And I think that's a great way to look at it.
Almost everything in life for me ends this way. But if all of your friends and family members have always been broke and always struggled, you'll probably struggle. If all of your family members and all of your friends have bad marriages, your marriage is probably going to struggle. And so one of the areas...
Are we going to get there? Or?
Yeah. No, I just say is get around people who are winning in their finances, because one of the things I've learned is that we become like those that we spend the most time with. And if you get around people that are winning with their money and you ask them the questions around money that you ask your broke friends, they're going to have a different answer. And if you do what they do, you're going to have what they have. And so I would just encourage people is if you're surrounded by good people that are always broke, you don't have to cut those people off from your life. But get around people that think differently and that are winning and do what they do, and you'll have what they have.
Well said.
All right. Our goal is to help you win with your money so you can win in life. Our goal on today's podcast is to help you take the word money and make it not a curse word, but a positive word by taking inventory, being disciplined, and making some changes. Thank you for joining us. Join us for episode number 4 next week. And we're going to keep getting better, keep helping you win with your money so that you can win in your life.
Advisory services are offered through CG Advisory Services LLC, a registered investment advisor, and through Guardian Wealth Strategies LLC, a registered investment advisor. CG Advisory Services LLC and Guardian Wealth Strategies LLC are separate and unaffiliated entities. The topics discussed on this podcast are for educational purposes only and are not intended to be investment advice or recommendations. Listeners should consult with their own financial professionals before making any investment decisions.